And good evening and welcome to CNN's continuing coverage, America's New War. I'm Donna Kelly, and for the next 2 hours, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories, your hopes, your fears, your questions, and tears are certainly okay at this time. We want to hear about the loved ones that maybe you've lost or you're still looking for, and the heroes that you may have met along the way. And then at the bottom of the hour, we'll talk about possible U.S. retaliation. NATO's former Supreme Allied Commander, General Wesley Clark, will be taking your questions. Then at 1 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time, we'll ask, how safe are you? A terrorism expert will be joining us from London. And then at 1:30 Eastern, what do you tell your children? A child psychologist will take your questions. So grab a pencil, tell us your stories, tell us about maybe the person that you've lost or who's missing because of Tuesday's savage attacks. The number to call that we want to give you right now, whether you're in the United States or anywhere around the world, is 1-404-221-1855. Again, that number is 1-404-221-1855. First, the latest developments for you, and for that we turn to Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards. Jim and Colleen.
Thanks so much, John, and we look forward to all of that. But we do want to begin with a new development for you. Searchers have recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked plane that crashed in western Pennsylvania.
Authorities are saying that this device was found 25 feet below ground in a crater made by the impact. The recorder has been sent to Washington for analysis. An FBI spokesman says it appears to be in his words, fairly good shape. Searchers had already recovered the flight data recorder from that plane and the two recorders from the jetliner that targeted the Pentagon. Well, turning now to other developments, law enforcement authorities say that they have made their first arrest in this investigation of the week's terrorist attacks. The person in custody is described as a material witness, and CNN's Mike Betcher has more on the investigation.
4,000 special agents chasing 36,000 leads and circulating to 18,000 law enforcement agencies a growing list of people they want to question.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation has also forwarded a list of more than 100 names to numerous law enforcement organizations. These are the names of individuals the FBI would like to talk to because we believe they may have information that could be helpful to the investigation.
Another FBI list, this one made public. The 19 men who the FBI says were the hijackers of the 4 aircraft. 7 of the men were pilots, according to CNN terrorism analyst Peter Bergen. 13 of them have recognizable Saudi tribal names from the west and southwest of Saudi Arabia, an area where bin Laden has recruited.
According to a source familiar with the bin Laden organization, men returning from Afghanistan who had trained with bin Laden arrived in Saudi Arabia in recent weeks and were talking about some kind of big operation that was imminent.
The FBI searched this apartment in San Diego, where in those final stages, Monday before the attack, 3 men left town in a hurry.
They had the truck right here that was moving out. It didn't seem like you were leaving anywhere. I mean, I never seen nobody move at midnight.
The trail of another accused hijacker, Mohammed Atta, in the months before the attack, led from Hamburg, Germany, to Florida and a series of flight schools, rental car agencies, and apartments. Then back to Hamburg, a return to Florida, and a final trip to New England, where he boarded a Boston to Los Angeles flight that eventually crashed into the World Trade Center. U.S. intelligence sources tell CNN the entire terrorist operation required so many people and special skills that they believe several terrorist groups had to be involved. Egyptian Islamic Jihad, led by this man, Ayman Zawahiri, a close bin Laden associate, is one of the groups getting close scrutiny by U.S. analysts. They were photographed together about 3 years ago in Afghanistan. A second man who has not been seen in more than 20 years is also being scrutinized. Imad Mughniya, who is suspected by U.S. officials of masterminding a string of terrorism attacks against Americans, including the 1983 suicide bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241, has had numerous contacts with bin Laden since 1994, including face-to-face contact in the Sudan at an Islamic conference. This, according to Western and Mideast intelligence sources. A founding member of Lebanese Hezbollah, Mughniya is believed living in Iran. U.S. officials remain convinced that bin Laden was behind Tuesday's attack, but believe the day's mega-terrorism marked the debut of a new, larger, and more dangerous organization, a group with many heads and many faces. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
Well, he had seen the pictures on TV just like the rest of the world. He'd heard detailed reports from the mayor and the governor as well. But George W. Bush, the commander-in-chief, got his first look at Ground Zero in New York City Friday. John King reports.
A first-hand look at the worst of the devastation and a pep talk that included a promise to those pulling the dead from the rubble.
I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
After his emotional tour of New York, Mr. Bush was asked if he knew who was responsible.
We know we got a suspect.
But lead suspect Osama bin Laden is an elusive target, and aides say one of the president's greatest challenges is convincing an angry nation to be patient.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
Mr. Bush declared a national emergency and authorized a call-up of the National Guard and reservists. And Congress passed a resolution authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force to retaliate. Senior officials say they do not rule out a first wave of military strikes in the near future. But Mr. Bush is asking his national security team and other world leaders to develop a long-range plan. For example, sources tell CNN the president is asking the leaders of Canada, France, Germany, Britain, and other nations to do more to break up terrorist cells in their countries, and asking Saudi Arabia and other moderate Arab nations to crack down on bin Laden's financial supporters and to take a tougher line with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
In our response, we will have to take into account not only the perpetrators, but those who provide haven, support, inspiration, financial, and other assets to the perpetrators.
Mr. Bush also led the nation in a day of prayer and remembrance, with former presidents, the cabinet, and the Congress joining in.
Grief and tragedy and hatred are only for a time. Goodness, remembrance, and love have no end. And the Lord of life holds all who die and all who mourn.
Consoling the nation is another role for a president at times of crisis, and a father who knows the strains of the job well gave his son a supportive tap.
Administration sources say weekend national security meetings will focus on options for responding, and senior officials tell CNN they enter those talks with one encouraging development. Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, has now promised to fully cooperate in any U.S. operations. John King, CNN, the White House.
As people around the world mourn those killed in the terror attacks, more light is being shed on the lives of the victims. Here's a look at some of those who were lost.
Lost on United Flight 93 from Newark, headed to San Francisco. Mark Bingham, a rugby player and owner of a PR firm. He ran with the Bulls this summer in Pamplona. Alan Bevan had taken a year's sabbatical from environmental law. He was on his way to Bombay to work as a volunteer. Thomas Burnett was the COO of a medical research company. He reached his wife, Dina, by cell phone. When she told him about the other 3 downed planes, Burnett vowed he and his fellow passengers would fight back against the hijackers. United Flight 93 crashed into a Pennsylvania field at 10:20 a.m., September 11th, 2001.
The victims of the terrorist attack came from many walks of life. Barbara Olson was a 45-year-old lawyer and a conservative commentator on CNN. She was aboard the plane that targeted the Pentagon. Just before the attack, she made 2 telephone calls to her husband, U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson.
I think she must have been partially in shock from the fact that she was on a hijacked plane. She absorbed the information. We then both reassured one another this plane was still up in the air, this plane was still flying, and this was going to come out okay. I told her it's going to come out okay. She told me it was going to come out okay. She said, "I love you."
Well, memorial services were held across the world Friday to remember all the victims. In the United States, an official day of prayer and remembrance brought people by the thousands to churches, synagogues, mosques, and public squares. President George W. Bush and former Presidents George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter were among those joined together in grief at a service at the National Cathedral in Washington. And on the West Coast, a wall of flickering flames. So look at it now as thousands gather in downtown Seattle, Washington to remember many in the city working for Boeing, maker of all 4 planes commandeered by the hijackers on Tuesday.
Definitely hundreds of people could.
Now inland to Las Vegas, where the city known for its glitz and neon marked the National Day of Prayer and Remembrance by dimming lights on casinos. That happened at 10:45 Eastern Time. And there you see it. Well, we're going to have another news update later this hour. I want to go back over to Donna. Now, though, Donna.
All right, Colleen and Jim, thanks very much for the latest there. As we carry on, as we told you, our first half hour now, we are going to concentrate on wanting to hear your story. And our first caller this evening from California, and Terry. Terry, hi.
Hello.
Go right ahead. You're on the air.
Oh, I just wanted to say that my heart goes out to all of the people in New York. I mean, there's no words that can explain how I'm feeling. Like I said, there's just no words. It's very hard. I'm an American citizen, but I'm Muslim, and I feel the tragedy double because, I mean, you know, my child, myself, all the safety. I had a sense of security here, and now I'm afraid.
I was going to ask you, are you afraid, and how old is your child, and have you had anybody say anything or do anything threatening to you?
No, everything's been really good here. You know, I thank God for that. Everything has been really, really good here. Nobody has said anything out of the ordinary. It's just the fear that it may happen, and I think that's what scares me most because you don't know what to expect. You're always looking over your shoulder. And my son's 4. He doesn't really know anything. So, I mean, I'm happy about that because I can shield him.
And there is a hotline that folks would like to call if there are problems, and we'll try and get that for you and have that sometime during the program as well. Let's go on to William, who is in California. William? William, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You bet. You're on the air. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll make it brief. I know a lot of people want to talk, so I just wanted to say that out on Beach Boulevard here in Huntington Beach, there are so many people out right now with flags and candles, and every single car on both sides of the street that are going by are honking their horns, and it's just a tremendous sight. And I rode my bike down there to check it out, and I didn't want to leave. It's amazing, actually.
I gave a thumbs up and a wave to a few folks here in the Atlanta area, too, as I was driving in. There were folks with candles and flags waving those on some of the street corners as well. Past a church that was doing 24 hours. They were open for people to come in and have some prayers, and this church had communion and prayers as well. People around the United States, in fact, around the world, certainly memorializing a lot of the folks. You know, we still don't even have all the final numbers of the victims. We want to know, certainly as we carry on, though, how the news of the terror attacks is affecting you. And we do have another call. I'm sorry, David from where? Florida.
Orlando.
Hi, David. You're on the air.
Hi. I'm from Orlando, Florida. I'd just like to give a prayer out. Of course, my prayers go out to all the firefighters and all the the medical personnel assisting in the rescue mission to get our survivors out of there if there are any. But I also want to give a prayer out all to our Arab Americans who have taken up root in this country. I just don't want the same mistake that was made a half a century ago when Pearl Harbor was hit, and we wrongfully imprisoned Japanese Americans. I hear a lot of violent acts being taken upon our American Arab friends here in America. I just don't want to reduce ourselves to the same atrocities that these terrorists have inflicted to us.
David in Orlando, thanks very much for the call. And speaking of the rescue workers, I saw earlier that the USNS Comfort is in the New York Harbor now. That is the Navy hospital ship, and that'll be a rest area for relief workers. They have about 1,000 beds. They can get a shower, they can get some food, get a little bit of a break there on that Navy hospital ship, the U.S. Comfort. Let's go to our Jody Ross. She is in New York. Let me give you the phone number once again if you're trying to call in, just as a refresher. We gave you it a few minutes ago, but let's do that once again. 1-404-221-1855. Let's go to Jody Ross. She is at the Armory, where teams are trying to help families find their loved ones, and we have seen broken-hearted people for days now. Jody?
It's true, Donna. That doesn't seem to end. And, you know, Friday was a day of prayer and remembrance. And since it's just a little bit after midnight, that feeling still prevails here. People are praying and they're remembering. And one more thing, they're hoping that even as we slowly move into day 4 since the terrorist attacks, that they will find their loved ones. I'm sitting here with Eddie and Anthony, missing a father and father-in-law respectively, right? Tell me the last time you saw Anthony.
Tuesday.
He worked in the World Trade Center.
Worked at World Trade Center, Building 2 on 101st floor. And we heard from him about 5 to 9, and then at 9 o'clock he called like 3 times. He witnessed what took place in Building 1. While my mother-in-law was on the phone with him, she said, please, Tony, you know, leave the building, get out of there, you know. And he's like, Jerry, it's okay. The people are jumping out of the windows. He was crying hysterically. He's like, I'm okay, I'm okay. She begged him to leave, but knowing him, he probably stuck around. Someone could have fell, someone could have panicked. He's the kind of guy that would help anybody.
Right, he would have stayed to help.
He would have definitely stayed to help, but then I'm sure that once they got out of there, you know, he would have got down. He had enough time. We're hoping he made it down to the basement.
Anthony, you mentioned, too, that he was there in 1993 for the first bombing on the World Trade Center, right?
Yeah, me and my father was there in 93, and we both survived it. And called my mother to let her know that we were all right. And we're just helping out, volunteers, Red Cross, everything.
Are you shocked now, though, that you're back in this situation where, again, it's the World Trade Center and you can't locate him?
It's very shocking. I just hopefully he did get out. Back then in '93, it was tough, and we never thought that this would happen again, at all.
Anthony, I asked you before if you were losing hope because, you know, we're many days now past the day of the attacks, but you don't seem to be losing any.
We can't lose hope. You run out of tears, you cry 1 minute, the next minute you hear a good story that brings your hope up a little bit. And knowing that my brother-in-law and my father-in-law know that building well, there's a very good chance that they're down there. We've checked every number there is to check. The Armory, just now, half hour ago, whatever it was, we've been to every hospital. We've called every number dozens of times. We had 6 phones going at the same time for a good 15 hours straight. We've done everything and some. And, I mean, you can never do enough, but we're not giving up.
You still believe?
We believe.
You guys, good luck. Thank you for talking to us. We appreciate it. What are the chances of finding these people? Who knows? What's the ratio of actually finding them? Who knows? But these people don't care. They're praying and they believe in miracles, and they're hoping that in the next few days they'll see one. Donna, back to you.
Jody Ross there in New York at the Armory. Thanks very much. And sometimes that's all they can cling to is the hope and the prayers and hoping for a miracle. Let me give you that number I was talking about earlier. It's the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights from one of our former callers just a couple of minutes ago. It's for Arab and Muslim Americans to report threats and vandalism and attacks, and it's a hotline for filing complaints. You see it there on your screen, and I'll read it to you as well if you're just listening. 800-552-6843. Once again, it's 800-552-6843. I had it in my notes but had to find it for you. Our next caller, Natasha from Wisconsin. Go ahead, please.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just calling to sort of make a plea and to ask that now is the time for the American people to stand together, which I think a lot of us do realize. However, in some of the cities that I live around, there are just people making nonsense bomb threats to area malls, and you know, the world, we're under enough scare right now. We don't need all the extra nonsense to be carried forth from this point. And it's a time for all of us, in spite of race, nationality, color, religion, it's a time for us to all pull together and stand together and support the United States of America, as those that are doing such a tremendous job in New York and in Washington are doing for us.
All right, Natasha from Wisconsin, thanks very much. And Linda from Illinois, you're next on the air with us tonight. Go ahead, please. Linda, are you there?
Yes.
Go right ahead, please.
Yes, I am. I just wanted to tell everyone in New York and Washington how terrible and how upset we are that this has happened to them. We're not that far from Chicago, and I was born and raised in Chicago, and I know how that would feel if I was up there. And we still have a lot of family up there. But I wanted to let the president and all these people know that we are behind them. And I also wanted to tell them that I'm a grandmother, and I'm going to be a grandmother in a week and a half with my 4th grandchild. And I just want the president to know to please let this be taken care of, because I want to live and I want my grandchildren to live in a country that has always been so wonderful and so free.
Linda from Illinois, thanks very much for your call. Let's go to Gary Tuckman. As we've been telling you, Gary Tuckman was able to get into Ground Zero. He has seen it from a perspective that few of us have, and how shocking it is. Gary, what have you seen, and what are you doing tonight?
Well, Donna, the first thing that I still just can't get over is the fact that the World Trade Center complex is not standing 110 stories behind me. I mean, it's an incredible landmark of New York City. Any of you who have been here have seen it, and any of you who haven't been here have also seen it on television and on postcards and in magazines. And you would come down this street that I'm standing on right now, Greenwich Street, and you would see those towers there, and you would just got very used to it, and just incredible that it isn't there. I mean, when this week began, those 2 towers towered over New York City, and everyone was having a good time in the city, relatively innocent. And all of a sudden, this city has completely changed. Now, on Wednesday, the day after this happened, a paramedic took me to Ground Zero. She wanted me to see it. She didn't feel that people throughout the world really knew how bad the damage was. And you know what? She was absolutely right, because despite the fact that I had been here the day before reporting from 4 blocks away, until you get there, you can't imagine what it looks like. The rubble looks like a mountain range, and the mountain range at some points is 75 feet tall, and it still is, despite the fact that they've taken 10,000 tons of the rubble to a landfill nearby. And that I found completely incredible. What I also found incredible was about a 10 block by 10 block range, you have damage all over the place. You have debris, you have rubble, you have at least 150 or 200 businesses that have been destroyed or damaged. And right now officials are telling us that they estimate that about 20% of the buildings here in Lower Manhattan are damaged. The final thing I want to tell you, what really struck me and what will stick with me forever, there was a Brooks Brothers store right across from the World Trade Center that is now being used as the temporary morgue. And we went in there and saw it. Donna, back to you.
Hey, Gary, tell us a little bit more, if you know some more information this evening, about some of the other surrounding buildings, because there was worry about those collapsing or being structurally damaged, and so that could be a problem as well, too. What do we know about that tonight?
The emergency officials are very concerned about those other buildings. There are 3 buildings that are said to have some structural deficiencies, and officials said they were possibly in danger of collapse. But today, the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, stressed that they are not in danger of imminent collapse, and people should not be overly concerned about those buildings at this time. So that's the word from the mayor.
How about food and water there for the volunteers and the folks who are getting so tired, and then who we read about who are working without gloves and have bloody hands, and who are in there just doing the best they can until they can't take it anymore? When we read about some of those rescue workers who have to just sit down and they're collapsed emotionally and physically.
I think right now, as the days have gone by, the emotional problems are bigger, because people are realizing for the last 2 days they have not found one survivor. That is very disappointing. But in the last couple of days, physically, it's gotten easier. More equipment has come, more material has come, people have their gloves, people are wearing masks, but you really need, when I'm out talking to you on the air, I'm wearing the mask because it's very smelly here from the smoke. And you can see right now, that smoke has been like that since this began 3.5 days ago. So when you're this close, you really need to wear those masks most of the time. And especially when you're at Ground Zero, you really have to wear the mask. And pretty much all the people on the site now are wearing those masks.
And some of those particles, too. Gary Tuckman there at the scene. Thanks very much for bringing us up to date, and we'll be checking back in with you, I'm sure. As we carry on, our next caller is Charles from Mississippi. Hi, Charles.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Hope you're the same. Tell us what you're thinking.
Well, I'm thinking our prayers are really going out with the people that are out there working. This is for everybody in Mississippi. We're having big blood donations, and we're sending a lot of equipment up there to New York to help them. And also, our prayers go out to all the victims, families, and all their children that we know they will be missed, and also to our president, who we love, that has done such a good job of trying to pull this nation together, which I think has been pulled together pretty good, because I've never seen so many flags and "In God We Trust" all over the signs here in Mississippi.
Can you get a flag, Charles? It's tough to find a flag here in Atlanta, I'll tell you that. We saw some numbers from Walmart and Kmart earlier today that 300,000 and 200,000 flags have been sold. I had to settle for a balloon because I had actually had a damaged flag before, and of course you don't want to fly a damaged flag if you can help it. And so I was trying to find a new one, and I'm telling you, tough to find one.
Yes, it's tough to find the flags, and now the flower shops here have gone out and made red, white, and blue ribbons for people to wear, and you give $1 donation, and they're sending it to New York to the people that need it.
Yeah, and I got a flag balloon. If you can just find something red, white, and blue to fly then.
But I'd like to say to President Bush that we love him. We think that he is really, him and the mayor of New York has done such a good job, and the governor and the people in Washington has done such a good job. We know that this will be handled in a way that it will not hurt us Americans, and that I have seen that.
What do you think that would be, Charles, though, handled in a way that would not hurt America? How would that be?
I believe that the president's going to go in there and bring them out and bring them back to America for justice.
All right. We thank you for your call. Thank you for your call. Robin in Texas, would you go ahead, please?
Yes, I have written a poem for all the rescue workers there in New York and Washington.
Go right ahead.
It's called "For Those Who Serve." We can't begin to imagine the brotherhood that exists between those who serve us when disasters strike and resist. We are usually caught unaware, though they all rush in to assist, when common sense usually tells us to retreat, give up, and to quit. They don't think of themselves as heroes. They are only doing their job. Though no one could convince me, they are not guided by the hand of God.
As you watch the rescuers, you were obviously moved, Robin, to write that, and that's lovely. So many people have been moved. Is there something that you felt, so many people have been moved to try and do something, and you've written a poem? What about some of your neighbors? I talked to some of my neighbors, and they were having trouble sleeping, waking up, and everybody was so shocked and shook up about it. How about you?
Well, I've had trouble sleeping myself. It's everyone I know has been saying prayers. Either if they haven't, well, they've all been praying. And unfortunately, I'm unable to give blood. I have friends who are unable to give blood through various illnesses and so forth. But we are all doing whatever we can in whatever way, whether it be praying, giving blood, just hoping for the best that survivors are found and are totally behind everything that's going on right now.
Robin from Texas, thank you for sharing what you wrote with us. We really appreciate it. Ron in California, you are next on the air with us. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm calling because I'm very thankful for the services that they had today, and I was deeply moved by Reverend Graham's words, and more importantly, how this has awakened America's renewal for spiritual necessity to draw unto God, to pray unto God, regardless of your faith, but to really have a faith and believe in something, and that love is the foundation for a family and relationship, and how we relate to what is happening today in our world has brought a lot of fear and terror being that is evil. The ultimate evil has caused us to really think about life and what it is, and who we are related to, and how much we love them, and what we want to do with our love for those people. But I really think about what Dr. Graham said, it struck me that only God could have loved these people more that we have lost through this terror, through this evil act, but only God that took their lives through this terror could only have loved them more. That through this, that the United States of America, that the world, the civilization across the world who has heard these words would really listen to what the Talmud is saying, that is proclaiming a holy war. And I agree, it is a holy war, because we will come together, we will unite with our prayers, not just today, but every day and throughout, as we lead our troops into war, as we pray for those brave souls that are out there rescuing the damaged.
Reverend Billy Graham was, of course, at the National Cathedral today at that prayer service in remembrance, and he talked about, under the debris, that there's a foundation that was not destroyed. And he also talked about, from some of my notes, because I was here at CNN and then went home for a little break and came back, so I took some notes there. And he said we have a choice to implode like the buildings with our emotions and as a nation, or we can become stronger. We can rebuild on a strong foundation. And he said rather than having the evil separate and divide us, it has done the opposite. It has actually united us. So Ron from California, thanks very much for your call, and let's go on to Susan in Pennsylvania. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
Go right ahead. You're on the air.
I just wanted to let the people know in New York, which is where I originally come from, that I'm very proud of the way they are handling this. My heart and my tears go out to the families of the people that have suffered through this tragedy. I also want to let President Bush know that we are behind him no matter what he wants to do. And he's brought us together not only as the United States but also spiritually, which was something that was long overdue. I really think he's done a fantastic job.
Ron was talking about a holy war that might need to be waged. Does that worry you when you say that he should do whatever he needs to do?
No, it doesn't worry me because America's a strong place and we will be able to handle anything that we have to. And I just think that sometimes, even though you don't want to go to war, it's something that might have to be done to rid us of these evil people that are out there that instead of just having differences of opinion feel that they have to hurt innocent people in order to do that, and it's just wrong. And I want my kids to grow up to be able to feel that they don't have to worry where they're going because some place is going to be bombed.
You know, talking about your kids, Susan, tell us how old they are, because coming up in our last half hour of this two-hour program that we're doing, we're going to talk with a child psychologist who's going to help us get through that with children and to tell us what we should do to help children. What have you done with your children, and how old are they?
I have an older daughter that's 19, and I also have a 12-year-old. And
are they upset?
Yes, my daughter is. We're taking collections for the families of the firefighters that are not found yet, and I have a business, and I'm taking collections with that. And she's very, very much into doing that and helping out as best she can. Mm-hmm. My younger daughter, she watches TV with me, and I try to make her understand that there are people that shouldn't be here in this world that do these horrible things, but you can't pin it on any one race. It's the evil people alone and not the race.
Mm-hmm. All right, Susan from Pennsylvania, hope you can stick around with us here on CNN, because as I was telling you, we do have that child psychologist who is going to be joining us. Coming up as the initial shock subsides, and shock is certainly not a strong enough word sometimes, and denial, but there are calls for retaliation, for vengeance, and they grow louder among some folks. So U.S. President Bush has made it clear that Washington draws no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them. Both could find themselves as America's targets, and Mr. Bush has declared a state of national emergency, authorizing the Defense Department to call up as many as 50,000 military reservists and National Guard. And then late Thursday evening, the U.S. House voted 420-1 to let President Bush exercise what it termed all necessary and appropriate force against those responsible for the attacks. But are you concerned that the United States might strike back before it has all the facts? Is a military campaign the best approach? And is a nation justified to maybe assassinate what it considers terrorist leaders? We want to know what you think about how America should respond. You can call us in the United States at 1-404-221-1855. Let's bring in General Wesley Clark. He is a former NATO commander and CNN's military consultant for us. General Clark, nice to have you join us. Thanks very much.
Nice to be here.
Does the United States have to retaliate? Is there no other choice?
Well, I know we're angry, but I wouldn't call it retaliation. We've got to do something about the threat that faces us.
What would you call it then? A response?
Well, it's a war that's been forced on the United States. Let's call it a response. We have the moral high ground. A terrible thing was done to us. We can't sit back and wait for the next blow to fall on the United States. So we've really got two near-term battles and a long-term campaign. Near-term battle number one is to protect the United States as best we can, and we're doing that with the FBI, and we're looking for these terrorist cells, and we're strengthening our air traffic control procedures and all of the other things that we're doing to protect ourselves at home. That's battle number one, and we've got to win it. Battle number two is if we can do something right away to these terrorist networks overseas, if we can strike at them in some way that throws them off balance, that tears up their plans, that makes them lose their command and control and respond to us and gives us more breathing room, then we should do that.
That was tried in the attack on the Sudan, but I want to go ahead and we're going to go to Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards, and we're going to continue our conversation with you, General Clark. But let's get the latest developments here as we carry on with our special programming. Jim and Colleen?
Okay, Donna, thanks very much. We're just getting the latest developments here for you. We've got a look right now.
Yes, searchers have found the cockpit voice recorder from that hijacked plane that crash landed in Pennsylvania.
That's right, and Congress has passed a joint use of force resolution authorizing President Bush to use the military to go after terrorists and those who harbor them as well.
And authorities say that they have made their first arrest in the investigation of those attacks, a person who was picked up as a material witness.
Well, as authorities continue the investigation into the attacks, Washington is also planning what officials are calling an appropriate response to strike back at terrorism. Experts say that response will likely have more than one dimension to it.
The enemy is in many places. The enemy is not looking to be found. The enemy is hidden. The enemy is very often right here within our own country. And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option. It may well be that the diplomatic efforts, political efforts, legal, financial, other efforts may be just as effective against that kind of an enemy as with military force.
Congress has already passed a joint resolution authorizing the president to use force against those responsible for the attacks. Now, to augment the armed forces, the president has authorized the Defense Department to call up reservists. Mr. Bush has given the go-ahead for 50,000 National Guardsmen and reservists to assist with so-called homeland defense plans. Administration officials say the primary role of these troops would be to join recovery and domestic security efforts. And meanwhile, just a short while ago, the House passed a bill authorizing the use of force against those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. The measure swept through 420 votes to 1. The Senate had unanimously approved the resolution. Jonathan Karl has more on that.
On this question, 98 senators have voted in the affirmative. No senator has voted in the negative.
Without dissent and without public debate, the Senate authorized the president to use all necessary force against all those tied to the attacks.
For constitutional purposes, it's the same as a declaration of war. There is no constitutional difference between authorizing the president to use this kind of force and saying we declare war.
The hurried vote united conservatives and liberals who usually disagree about military intervention. Paul Wellstone, whose first significant vote as a senator a decade ago was against the use of force against Iraq in the Persian Gulf War, was one of the few to speak before the vote.
It's going to be a long, difficult struggle, but I believe people in our country and people in Minnesota are united in this. But we need to do this the smart way.
Despite the lack of debate, members of both parties had privately objected to a White House request for a more open-ended authorization of force against terrorists. As a result, the resolution passed authorizes the president to use military action specifically, quote, against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons.
It relates to the incident, and there's broad authority relating to the incident. It does not relate to all terrorism every place.
Several key leaders hope to avoid a repeat of the 1964 Tonkin Gulf Resolution, in which Congress, after North Vietnam allegedly attacked U.S. warships, almost unanimously granted President Johnson the authority, quote, to take all necessary measures to prevent further aggression by North Vietnam. Many in Congress came to regret that as the Vietnam War escalated and grew increasingly unpopular. While only Congress has the power to declare war, the president, under the Constitution, has the power to repel invasion. And if a war drags on, Congress, with its power of the purse, can ultimately bring an end to it by refusing to pay for it. Jonathan Karl, CNN, Capitol Hill.
A public opinion survey now suggests Americans overwhelmingly feel that the U.S. should take tough military action. In a CNN and Time poll, 62% of those polled said they feel Congress should declare war on those responsible for Tuesday's atrocities. 27% were opposed. The opinion poll sampling error is plus or minus 3%.
Well, since the attack, searchers have been working around the clock to try to find those who might have survived. In New York City, nobody has been pulled alive from the wreckage in 2 days now. The official number of missing in the attacks on the World Trade Center stands at 4,717 at this point. For their families, as you can imagine, the wait for word on loved ones is agonizing.
I'd like to know if he's dead, that he didn't hurt, and that they didn't suffer, any of them in there. And just, we want to be able to bury him and have the closure to do that.
But you know, Americans came together in communities large and small to remember those who were lost and to support each other as well in this time of mourning. CNN's Bruce Morton has that.
Church services everywhere. America's leadership was at Washington's National Cathedral, but services everywhere. Cleveland, Ohio.
We mourn for the many lives lost in a tragedy that remains etched in our minds forever.
Boston, Massachusetts.
Look with compassion on the whole human family, and especially on those who lost their lives this week.
Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer.
At the Pentagon, where many lost fellow workers and friends.
May God comfort all of you that are in loss today, and may we wait on Him and renew our strength.
Manchester, New Hampshire. An Islamic service in Sterling, Virginia, near Dulles Airport.
When people accuse you of being terrorists, this is because this is what they were told.
Austin, Texas.
Banish the violence that has been in our midst and the evil that exists around us.
Back at Washington's National Cathedral, the Commander-in-Chief.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
That service ended with a hymn, a battle hymn. Bruce Morton, CNN, Washington.
Colleen and I will be back with a news update at the top of the hour, but now back to Donna and more of your phone calls.
All right, Jim and Colleen, thanks very much. And we took a pause in our conversation with General Wesley Clark. General Clark, the former NATO commander, as you might remember, and a CNN military consultant currently with us. General Clark, you heard the CNN Time poll said a majority, overwhelmingly, want to see some tough military action. We were just talking about that before we took a pause to get up to date with the news. But how? You were talking about command and control, and I brought up that they tried to do that in the Sudan. How do you go in and make it effective without letting things spiral out of control?
Got to be smart. Got to have good information. We're developing those targets now. I'm very confident. We've done a lot of work inside the U.S. Armed Forces and the intelligence community on Osama bin Laden since 1998. We know a whole lot more now than we did then. And when we strike, if we find an effective way to strike, I'm confident it'll be a pinpoint strike that has real impact. Now, one of the other things we learned, though, in that episode of 1998 is you got to make sure the moderate Arab governments and our allies around the world understand what we're doing, because as Secretary...
And support. You have to have worldwide support.
As Secretary Powell said, this is a multi-dimensional effort. You have to have diplomatic support. You have to have legal support. You have to have economic support. And ultimately, these terrorists are going to be crushed by domestic pressures in each of the countries that cut off their support, and that's what we want to encourage.
You mentioned Osama bin Laden. He's not the only one that people would probably classify, even through the intelligence community, as a terrorist. Do we have any idea worldwide the number of cells, the number of networks of terrorists at all?
Well, we know there's an interlocking network, and Osama bin Laden is one among several. He's, in many cases, considered the chief financial backer and perhaps the overall coordinator. He may or may not have been the lead planner in this operation.
Yeah, and that
but there are more than 24 countries in which there are cells. There are any number of cells in these countries, and maybe 50,000 people or more have gone through various militant Islamic training centers.
50,000?
Maybe that many. They fought in Afghanistan. They fought in various places during the operations in the Balkans. There were some who came into Bosnia. Some married. Some were still there in Bosnia. We knew when we were trying to work in Kosovo that there were continued charges of radical Islamic fighters in Kosovo. We couldn't find much evidence of that, but they're in many different places in many cells around the world.
You trained leaders and soldiers for 5 years. A lot of them went to Desert Storm. Is the United States trained to fight a war against terrorists?
We've got the best armed forces in the world. It's not just an armed forces action, though. Primarily, it's a police action
and
intelligence action first. We've got great special operations forces if we have to go in and do something precise. We've got high technology, the most highly trained and disciplined, greatest soldiers and airmen involved that anybody has in the world. And we've got large conventional forces to back it up.
Evelyn is on the phone with us from California. Thank you for hanging on, Evelyn. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just calling in response to your question on whether or not you feel the U.S. should retaliate. And I feel that most of the United States, as much as we fear retaliation and what that might do to us, that we feel as a nation that we need to retaliate.
There is that thought, right, that we must retaliate, that the United States must retaliate or it would look weak, but then there are those who worry that it could spiral out of control, that it will get into this endless cycle of violence. What do you think about that,
We
General
have to
Clark?
keep in mind the long-term objective. The long-term objective is to go after the terrorist networks, to deprive them of support, to eliminate these individuals one way or another. Ideally, bring them to justice, put them on trial, convict them of their crimes, and take whatever measures justice. If they resist arrest or detention, then we'll use other means on them. But the idea is to focus on the long term and then take the steps necessary one by one to get there. What we want to do is be as precise as possible so we get at the threat. What we don't want to do is turn this campaign into something it doesn't have to be. This is not World War II. We don't have an enemy nation.
Could it come to that, though? Could it come to that? Or is the support so widespread for the United States, even now at this beginning, that the support would be great enough that it could be taken care of in a fairly rapid fashion?
We have the moral high ground. Our actions have to reinforce our morality, our compliance with international law, and our superior intelligence.
Don't you think a lot of folks worry about if it could get into a protracted battle and if it could go on and on if we were to get into a battle?
Well, I think people are very concerned about this, and it's a strange feeling in the American public. I've had a lot of people say we must retaliate, but then right after that they say, but we're worried about what happens next. And I think what we have to recognize is to win, and we have to win this because our nation and our way of life are at stake. We have to succeed. But to succeed, we have to do it in a smart fashion, and we have to think of the long term, and we have to prepare ourselves for a campaign, not a single strike, not two strikes, but something that is going to last months and perhaps years to defeat this if we do this the right way.
Much of the same that I hear on those 2 points, too. Must retaliate, but worried as well. Jim, you're on the phone from Texas with us. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hi, go right ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
I'd like to address a point that you made just a minute ago about the on and on. thing that's going on. You know, people are worried about the violence that could continue on and on.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's been going on for a long time anyway. We've always been under the threat of this, and even though the public doesn't hear about it, there's a lot of attacks that have been thwarted that people just don't hear about, and so the battle's been going on and on anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And people are concerned about that continuing on if we retaliate. Well, that's going to happen anyway.
All right.
Even if we don't retaliate, it's still going to continue on, and so we have to.
Jim, I think you're exactly right on that. I just don't label it retaliation. I label it part of another campaign. But I think we also have to recognize that even though this attack, or this wave of attacks seems to be over, we fully expect that there are other efforts underway or being planned against us. So we have to move forward and take action to disrupt this.
But a word you've mentioned over and over, have to do it smartly. Let's bring in our Major Garrett. He is at the White House, and he is privy to some of the information that's coming out of there, certainly, and what they're trying to look at and put plans together. Major?
Well, Donna, as you've been discussing, the president is reviewing all available options. As the Secretary of State has pointed out, this is multidimensional. Military is certainly at the top of the list of the various options the president and his national security team are exploring. But there's also diplomatic, economic means of trying to tighten the noose around terrorist cells around the world. All of those options are being discussed. The president will continue throughout the weekend to have intensive discussions with his national security team to look at all of these options. He is now armed, if you will, with the legislative will of the Congress to prosecute a war against those responsible for the abominable terrorist acts on September 11th. Armed with that and the very strong unified will of the American people and the unity expressed across the globe, the president is well positioned to prosecute this war. And as General Clark pointed out, we have the moral high ground, the moral authority to carry out this war. It will be protracted in many respects, experts believe, and also, as the Secretary of State outlined, multidimensional. So it's not just about a military response, be it very swift or down the road. Military is clearly a component of that, but also diplomatic, economic means of isolating, tightening a noose, and in some ways, whether it be swiftly or in a more protracted way, completely isolating to the point of nullity these terrorist cells.
Major Garrett at the White House, thanks very much. And of course, that use of force resolution says all necessary and appropriate force. What do you think is necessary and appropriate? What would you say, and how long do you think it could be? Sooner rather than later, before a response would come?
Well, it will depend on a lot of information that really isn't available to us in the public. But we do think that we have a very active target development process, and we need to use the right force to disrupt his operations. Whether that's an insertion of a raid, whether it's cruise missiles or long-range air, or whether it's the police cracking down on a terrorist cell in some city overseas. Those are, we need a grand campaign plan that puts that first response, but we don't have time to spare. We need to be moving just as we are.
What do you mean by that? Why don't we have time to spare? Because they're on the move?
That's right. And an organization that's this effective and this complex has more than one play in its playbook. And there's something else that's being rehearsed or prepared or maybe staged to go against us now. So we want to take as rapid action as possible, but we want to be effective and we want to have the support of our allies. And I think what the congressional resolution does is authorize the president to do precisely that without tying his hands. So whether it's with high-performance aircraft or cruise missiles or our soldiers or policemen in another country that we have to support, whatever it is, that's what we've got the authorization to do, I think.
Ground campaign with this, in your opinion?
Well, perhaps eventually, but I don't see a ground campaign in the offing. There's no country. We're not invading a country here, and there's been a lot of talk about Afghanistan, but I mean, frankly, no one has wanted to invade Afghanistan and hold it for any reasons other than what we saw the Russians try to do in the 1980s. They weren't very successful. We probably could be, but why do we want to be? That's their own country. What we want to do is get rid of the terrorist network.
And the High Holy Leader said that Osama bin Laden would not have been able to do this, couldn't train there, he's already moved, and some of the aid workers are pulling out now, and in some concern to a lot of folks, and a lot of innocent people face starvation and attacks, and the people who had money could get out, but others are stuck there. Let's go on to David. Is that right, David in Chicago? Thank you. Hi, David, you're on the air.
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Hope you're the same.
Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I believe the U.S. must and should retaliate, especially the way General Clark just explained it. It has to be targeted, strategic. It can't be just one big thing sending tons of troops down to Afghanistan, trying to take over the country, or different places trying to hunt the main person down, and then because that way you're going to get a lot of innocent people that maybe are good people. They're just poor. They're under the influence of the not the dictatorship, but you know the people are running Afghanistan right now.
Taliban. That's right. What about that, General Clark?
Well, I think
is
that's right.
Afghanistan looked at this point as sticking out? Pakistan said it wanted to think about the options about, the United States going to General Musharraf and taking a look at this and saying, okay, what's your cooperation factor here? As I heard earlier this evening, Pakistan has decided that it will cooperate with the United States. But does this mean
Afghanistan hasn't yet, because the Taliban are very dependent on the Mujahideen that came there during the war against the Russians and are still there in a large community of Arab fighters in fighting their own civil war. But perhaps the Taliban needs to recalculate, because
how likely are they to do that?
I don't know. It depends on what connections we may get.
Osama bin Laden has been there apparently for a couple of years.
He's been there,
at least.
and he's heavily supported, but also there are connections between Pakistan and the Taliban. And if General Musharraf really supports us the way he says he does, maybe he's going to pull connections. My point would be, we're not interested in Afghanistan per se. We're interested in smashing a terrorist network. And it just so happens that we believe that part of that terrorist network, or perhaps the hub of it, may be located there. But it's not a matter of attacking airfields or factories or facilities. It's a matter of individuals. Those individuals need to be identified, tracked, detained, and turned over to the United States and the world community for justice. That's what the Taliban needs to do if they truly believe in God and the professions of morality, which the mainstream of Islam does.
Could they face other pressure from other Middle Eastern countries? Could they make some headway in talking to the Taliban?
Well, perhaps they could, and that's certainly one of the courses of action that I think General Powell has outlined, our diplomatic approach.
Yeah, and at the State Department today, before that national prayer service, there was quite a showing of support as they headed on buses to go and signing condolence books. And as they headed to that prayer service, a couple of the diplomats that I saw on Wire reports said that maybe the United States doesn't realize just how strong the worldwide support is at this point. Let's go for a little perspective to our Garrick Utley. He's in New York. Hi, Garrick.
Hi, Donna. I think every conversation, particularly important conversations, very emotional ones about our future, such as this, may have a place for a devil's advocate. So let me just raise a couple of points. It's clear, as we've all been seeing, there's a great need and desire for some kind of action to be taken. A moment ago, you showed the very interesting results of the CNN Time poll, which shows that 62% thought that Congress should declare war. Clearly understood the reasons for that. But the next question on the poll: who should Congress declare war against? Answer, 61% saying, we don't know. And I think there in this poll that was taken, the CNN Time poll, we see the confusion, the uncertainty that lurks there sort of as a subtext along with this desire to take action. And the other comment I would make is simply that I think we all know that this word war has been diluted. We've had all kinds of war on drugs, a war on poverty, and now it's going to be war on terrorism. A new war, that's what we're calling a new war. Now, Donna, military action, I think, is going to be coming clearly. If we get lucky and if we're smart, as the general says, we're going to maybe send in some cruise missiles or other kinds of airstrikes if we know where bin Laden is or his associates are. But it's also going to be necessary, and we have to keep this in mind, to satisfy the public demand for action. And this puts a leader, the President of the United States, in a very difficult position. He only wants to act smartly when he knows he can accomplish something. At the same time, he has to satisfy what we saw today when he was visiting those rescue workers in New York chanting USA, USA, USA. Well, something will certainly happen in the coming weeks or the coming months, but I suspect in the long run, I'd like to hear the General's comments on this, that what this may turn out to be is very similar to the war on drugs. If you listen to what General Clark has been saying, the language he's been using, which is very well spoken, it's similar to the language that's been used on the war on drugs for many years. We got to get in and get those networks. We're not fighting countries. We got to get good intelligence information. We got to get hold of their leaders. From time to time we succeed. A drug cartel kingpin like Pablo Escobar is removed from the scene. But the war on drugs goes on and on and on without a victory.